This week, the latest film in the Beverly Hills Cop franchise, Axel F, has dropped on Netflix, so it's time to stop and rank all 4 Beverly Hills Cop films from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of all 4 films. My list is not the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. And let's get started. In last place, Beverly Hills Cop 3. While the movie might be set at an amusement park, the film itself is not remotely amusing. And from the very beginning, it just feels off. And the spark of life and creativity just isn't there. And so many of the different elements of the film feel like they're just at odds with one another.
You have a great line in this film where you tell Eddie that 94 is not your finest hour, which feels a little bit like a dig on Beverly Hills Cop.
It's not a little bit of dig. Okay, I'll tell you who doesn't like it. Eddie Murphy.
Okay, I was wondering like what?
He speaks openly about not liking that movie.
So in the very beginning of the film, it introduces Axel, and he's a much more serious version of the character, as if Eddie Murphy himself wanted to kind of move away from just being the funny guy and wanted to be taken a little bit more seriously. But it cuts from very serious Axel Foley to a bunch of henchmen singing and dancing to a song in a very silly, goofy sequence. And it goes from that into a major character that's been here since the opening of the first film being killed off and setting in motion kind of this revenge and justice plot line. And those 3 things don't mesh together very well, because it's like murder, revenge, silly dance number, serious Axel Foley. The first movie balanced the action and the comedy really well. The second one, being directed by Tony Scott, an action director, leaned more into the action. This time they brought in John Landis, a comedy director, and I think you feel that. It's lit differently than the previous 2 films, where everything is very bright and overlit, like comedies tend to be. There are all these very silly bits that happen. It's much more broad humor rather than Eddie Murphy wit. Eddie Murphy is just off his game, and it's very noticeable. The improv, the fast talking, all just that energy that he used to have isn't in this film. And that's that conflict I'm talking about, where the director is trying to make this silly, lighthearted version of Beverly Hills Cop, and Eddie Murphy is leaning in the opposite direction to make it serious Beverly Hills Cop, serious Axel Foley. Another thing that was a big part of the first 2 films was the chemistry of the entire group, the antics with Rosewood and Taggart. Well, Taggart isn't in the movie, and Rosewood is kind of sidelined. He's no longer the person being buddied up with Axel Foley, and this only, once again, highlights the Axel Foley problem, because you don't have any of the banter, you don't have the wit, you don't have the playing off of each other, you just have Eddie Murphy doing a more serious version of the character. Now, all that said, I don't think it's necessarily as bad as some people make it out to be. It's still a fun genre. It moves quick enough. It doesn't linger on any one plot point too long. There's action sequences. We're in a new setting. So it brings some new things to the table. But to me, it's easily the weakest, the most forgettable, and the most generic film in the franchise. But it did give an early role to a young actor named George Lucas.
Excuse me.
That's not fair.
In third, Beverly Hills Cop 2. Now, this one is dramatically better than Beverly Hills Cop 3. It's enjoyable, it's good enough, but I've always felt that it was a bit of a lackluster follow-up to the original in light of just how fun and energetic the first film was. And I think a big part of the problem might be that this is an example of bringing in a great director on a project where maybe he's not the best fit. So Tony Scott directed this film, and I would say without question that he's the best director of any of the films in this entire franchise. I'm a very big Tony Scott fan. And right out of the gate, you immediately notice his style in the cinematography and the way the action is choreographed, just the aesthetic vibe brought to the action sequences in this movie. You can tell Tony Scott is the person making this film. But you tune into a Beverly Hills Cop film for Axel Foley antics, not for stylized action and cool, gritty silhouette cinematography. And so there's a bunch of things in this movie that are really cool and huge upgrades over the rest of the franchise. But I think the core thing that this franchise is all about falls a little bit flat. And a bunch of that is the humor, where Eddie Murphy is still going for it with all the riffs, all the bits, all the humor. I just don't think it's as sharp or as funny this time around. And really, most of the best jokes in this movie, the ones that I actually remember afterwards, are all the Rosewood bits.
Billy, what are you doing? I've been wanting to wear this for a while, Sarge. Jesus Christ, Billy, we gotta talk.
About him becoming obsessed with being an action hero and having all the Stallone references with the posters on the walls and everything, which are really funny in light of the history of this franchise, with Stallone originally being Axel Foley and then him taking all of his ideas for his version of Beverly Hills Cop and putting them in Cobra. Them making that an ongoing in-joke in this franchise is hilarious. But the actual Eddie Murphy humor, it's not quite as good this go round. And I don't know if that was Eddie Murphy with where he was at, or if it was a matter of Tony Scott not being the right person to be able to pull all of that out of him. But kind of when you put it together, you get a solid LA-based crime film, like 80s action film with a great director, with a charismatic leading man, with a fun set of side characters, with a lot of jokes that land, some nice style to everything. And all that's good. All that's enjoyable. All that makes it a movie that I could pop on, watch it, have a good time with it. But I don't think it has what makes the best of the Beverly Hills Cop films pop and stand out as much as it should. Eddie Murphy himself is not crazy about this film, described it this way: Beverly Hills Cop 2 was probably the most successful mediocre picture in history. It made $250 million worldwide, and it was a half-assed movie. Cop 2 was basically a rehash of Cop 1, but it wasn't as spontaneous and funny. And basically, I'd agree with him. I'd give a little bit more credit to Tony Scott for what he brought to the table, but you tune in for the spontaneity and the humor, and it's just not as strong. Our runner-up, Axel F. For me, this was a solid Beverly Hills Cop sequel. I saw someone say that it's kind of like the Force Awakens of Beverly Hills Cop films, and I think that's about right. It sticks to the formula, but it does a good job with it. It's familiar. It's a little bit like a greatest hits album, but in a good way. It's like a comfort food. These are characters that we want to spend a little bit more time with, go on another adventure with them in this genre. So it's a good time. It's a nostalgia play, but a good nostalgia play. For the most part, that it played it safe was a good idea. Now, reusing all the music cues from the original film, I thought that was a step in the wrong direction and too safe, so safe that it looped back around and just became a bad idea. But otherwise, I thought it worked. The comedy landed for me. Eddie Murphy isn't in his 20s anymore. He can't do what he used to do, but he's still funny in a new way, and it brings kind of a different energy and vibe to it. He's still convincing as the action lead, and they acknowledge his age and that he's in a different phase of life, but without changing him, without needing to break him or anything like that. It's just like, yeah, he's a cop. Like, that's what he does really well. That's what he's always been good at. That's where he's always leaned into. And that's what he does in this movie. Now, when it comes to the original trio, it was great to see them on screen together. I wish we got more time with the three of them together as opposed to just really this one sequence. In particular, Rosewood disappeared for a little bit too much of the runtime, and I think they should have found some way to give him more to do or something to do in the middle of the film.
God, I missed you, Axel.
When it comes to the new characters, Levitt, I thought it fit in nicely as kind of the new buddy in our buddy cop formula. He can be funny, charming, do action. The daughter, I think, was a misstep. I don't mind the idea of the plot line where they took things and how they handled it, but they gave her like no personality. She's very one-dimensional. She's angry daughter. And as a Foley, she doesn't have any of the Foley charm or humor when interacting with her father. And so it's just kind of very one-dimensional, kind of keeps hitting the same note that she doesn't want to talk to him. She doesn't want to talk to him. She doesn't want to talk to him. Repeat that for an hour and 15 minutes. But on the action level, I think that there was a bunch of cool action sequences. I liked being with the characters. The story worked well enough. It's not breaking new ground. It's not reinventing the genre, but it's delivering more of a franchise that I enjoy with the right tone, the right vibe, characters I want to spend more time with, and it did a good job with it. But of course, coming in at number 1 is the original Beverly Hills Cop, an instant buddy cop classic and a movie that immediately propelled Eddie Murphy to superstardom. At that point in time in his career, he was just oozing with energy and charisma and could just show up, start riffing, and comedic gold would just pour out of him. And from beginning to end, you just have him showing up and just commanding your attention with his infectious grin, his laugh, and of course, just his witty, constantly just sharp as can be banter, wit, improvisations that he brought to the table.
Check Rolling Stone magazine's Axel Foley. That's what it is.
But the other piece to this is that it's not just the Eddie Murphy show. If it was that, it would still be this great, really fun film, but it's a buddy cop film where they partner him up with Taggart and Rosewood, which those two in and of themselves have their own fun banter that's so wildly different and more subdued from what Eddie Murphy is doing. And when you put the three of them together, there's just even more comedic gold that comes from it, where they're the straight man to his just wild, bold Foley character, and it all lands, it all works.
Mr. Ahmed Foley is here to see...
Axel Foley. Axel.
Axel Foley is here to see her.
In addition to that, you do, of course, have our cop story kind of going on here. And, it's sticking to the formula of your LA-based investigation, but it works. It's fun. It's a great package where you have the action and the mystery driving the story forward, and then wherever Foley shows up, whenever we pause to watch Taggart and Rosewood, it's fun. It's funny. Now, of course, the one of the greatest what-if scenarios of the 1980s is from the fact that Stallone was originally cast as Axel Foley. And he worked on his version of the film and was rewriting it to make it more of an action movie. And eventually they realized now he wants to do this whole other big action film.
It was going to be a wildly different... what I always heard was that he was taking the humor out of the script and it was going to be much more of a harder kind of...
No, he rewrote it and made it a lot more expensive because he wanted to do big car crashes down Rodeo Drive and bust up some Bentleys. And they didn't know they had Beverly Hills Cop. They didn't want to spend that much money on the movie, so...
Let's let him do his own movie. And he goes off and does Cobra, that essentially he brought those ideas into that film. But Cobra's still very different from this movie. So it just makes you wonder, what would that have been? Would it have been a hit? I can't fathom that it would have been as iconic because Eddie Murphy is Axel Foley. You can't divorce the two. And it's tough to imagine someone in Hollywood in the 80s more kind of different on their strengths than Stallone. And I love Stallone. I've got multiple posters and pictures of him on the wall right in front of me. But he's so not Axel Foley.
Your disease, and I'm the cure.
Man, hold up. Wait a second. You guys are arresting me for getting thrown out of the window?
What could have been? It's such a fascinating one. Anyway, this is a classic. It's a great one. It still holds up to this day. And so without question, it comes in at number 1. If you enjoyed this video, you can check out some of my thoughts on some other classic action movies right over here in this 31 on 31, where I ranked 31 classic action movies. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV.